When you're designing something and taking inspiration, I suppose they are an abstract interpretation of somebody else's piece of art.
We're talking about this painting by Canaletto today of the interior of the Rotunda at Ranelagh. We normally associate Canaletto with his native Venice, and the National Gallery has plenty of wonderful paintings by him set in his native city. But this one's actually one of two that the gallery owns that he painted while he was in England. It's a very unusual structure. It's largely made out of wood. It was apparently 150 feet across. We don't have a height for it, but it looks absolutely vast. The figures seem dwarfed by the building. You have to kind of zoom in to see them on this quite kind of stage-like floor and see that actually they're strolling, they're chatting, there are children, maybe they're listening to the orchestra. Very commonly with Canaletto, you get this slightly elevated view, and you can't quite tell where he is. He doesn't really seem to be quite on a level with the ground, or indeed the kind of next floor up, but sort of hovering somewhere above. But you just kind of accept it because he uses that so artfully. So we were kind of wondering, what was it perhaps that drew you to this painting?
Well, I was asked by Boodles, as part of their partnership with the National Gallery, to design a garden for RHS Chelsea Flower Show. And I did a tour of the gallery, and I found myself in the room that's sort of dedicated to Canaletto and his paintings. And I was, from a distance, attracted to this painting because I think it was the repetitive and perspective elements that you see in it. You've got arches that are not only beautiful curves, but also have linear columns and top elements to them, and the light that you can see that he's created in this painting. It wasn't a painting I was particularly familiar with, I must say, and I read the title. It said Ranelagh Gardens, Rotunda at Ranelagh Gardens, and I thought for a moment, well, Ranelagh Gardens, that's one of the parts in the showground for Chelsea Flower Show. So it was a fantastic coincidence to be attracted to a painting because what I saw visually and what interested me, and then also find there was already an association with something that I was designing for.
Similar to you, Catherine, I started with getting a real feel of the gallery as a whole. I spent several hours just looking at different paintings, hoping to just kind of pick up some ideas of how a whole collection of about 40 pieces of jewellery could work. And it was really the perspective in this particular painting that drew me. I had already decided that I quite liked the idea of creating the collection around artistic techniques, and I'd been looking at play of light as one of them. And then I liked the strong architectural feel to this. I like the sense of depth, and it was that sort of diminishing, the sort of classical use of the arch, but then as it diminishes in size, creating quite an interesting look. And some of the pieces of jewellery have that where it gives the illusion of perspective, but then it actually has an underlayer within the piece of jewellery as well. So there is actually that sort of genuine sense of depth in the piece.
When you're designing something and taking inspiration, for me, when I was creating the garden arches, I suppose they are an abstract interpretation of somebody else's piece of art.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what you're doing. You're perhaps attracted to certain elements of a painting yourself. So somebody else will look at the painting and see something very different to you. You spoke about the details in the painting, the figures and all of that. And to begin with, I think I didn't particularly look at that and didn't see those because I was so strongly attracted to the architectural element of the painting.
Same for me, actually. I was very fascinated by what you had to say about the figures. I think I got the sense of drama from the painting, but it was very much the architectural elements, and in terms of adapting it, how it could work on the body. So how those arches could sort of flow around the wrist or around the neck, and in that sense, very naturally, they diminish in size as they go around the back of the neck or they flow around the wrist. So getting them coming slightly closer together as they appear to go slightly further away works very, very well for a piece of jewellery.
And obviously you've both been thinking about light, and actually it doesn't strike you to begin with, but in fact, even if we imagine that there might be a doorway here, another doorway, actually you could never really get that play of light on illuminating the top of that central structure, but of course he needs it because he wants that shape and those repetitive shapes to really, you know, stand out. So I guess we could sort of wonder how this came about, that Canaletto is painting this structure and how he did it. We do know that there was an earlier version that's now in the collection in Compton Verney in Warwickshire, and that this was painted for somebody called Thomas Hollis, who was actually a friend of Joseph Smith, who was Canaletto's great patron, kind of go-between when Canaletto was in Venice, and probably one of the reasons that he came to London to work in the first place. Sadly, we, as far as I know, don't have any preparatory materials, but you know, presumably there must have been, you know, to produce something of such kind of complexity. And we know that, you know, we do have extant drawings from Venice. And certainly we can see that certainly his initial inquiries are linear. You know, he's looking at placing the shapes, the lines, and then maybe some of the detail as well. So I don't know how that kind of corresponds to either of your kind of working processes.
Similar start. I started with doing lots of sketches. I sketched in particular the sort of receding arches, and then there was it's creating those elements and maybe adding them to different elements from other Canaletto paintings. Some of the others I was interested in the reflection. On this one, the fact that you had 3 layers where they're all disappearing in size. So I did all of those drawings while I was here, and then started to work them into pieces of jewellery. Initially just a rough sketch of how a collar could look or how a bracelet could look, and then it becomes, you sort of start to work into it a little bit more, getting into the technical detail, how the clasp could work, where all the stones would fit, and then making the necessary adaptations. So is it similar for you, Catherine?
Well, for me, I did the same thing. I did sketching here. I recently sort of found my the page, my original sketches when I was here. They're not detailed. They're more to remind me of the paintings I was interested in. So I've got a very basic sketch of this Canaletto and some others also that I was looking at the time. I suppose I'm then also thinking, having to design the whole garden. For me, this was one element within the garden. So I've got some sketches where I've taken the painting and I've actually overlaid and done some drawing on top of the painting, because I was looking at the arches like yourself, but I've then moved away from it and taken an abstract interpretation of that to make it work within the garden. But there's always, yes, the sketching process first. I think drawing by hand, for me, frees the mind a little, and I relax, and then other ideas come as you're sketching.
I agree. I think hand drawing gives more feeling to it. I think a lot of designers might start instantly by working on a computer, but I actually think designing or sketching out by hand makes a huge difference. And I find that sometimes if I'm developing the design and it's not quite capturing the essence that I want it to while I'm working on the computer, I will actually go back to hand drawing and then sort of revert and think, right, start again, and then try and get it right at that point before developing it further.
So it's been so interesting to talk to you, because obviously I work here at the National Gallery, and I'm sort of slightly in this kind of wonderful vacuum with all these beautiful paintings. And then it's been so interesting to see how you've taken from this 18th century painting, you know, to produce the kind of jewellery and the garden that you have.
I'm certainly really thrilled with how the collection has come out. The pieces, even though it's an 18th century painting, the finished pieces of jewellery actually look very contemporary. It's just brought something different into the style of the jewellery that wouldn't perhaps have been there otherwise.
I think for me as well, that's quite similar. It's an abstract interpretation of a painting that perhaps people wouldn't always think would inspire you today, and it's really lovely to be then celebrating this painting and seeing it come to life.
So if you're interested in finding out more about art history, you can click here or here, and you can subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.